Welcome back to MidPoint. Former commissioner on the Federal Election Commission, Hans von Spakovsky, and First Amendment legal teacher at the University of Kansas, founder of the Denton's Law Firm, Kansas City office, Mark Johnson. Hans, you wrote an article in the Wall Street Journal entitled, "Here Comes the 2014 Voter Fraud." There are many people who will look you right in the eye and say, "Doesn't exist, Hans. It's not here. It's all just a fabrication." You, however, spend the very first paragraph in here basically pointing out that it does exist, and there are instances where indeed it could happen. Why is it so tough to get it across to somebody, to anybody, to certain people, that the chance of this happening in itself is the biggest issue that we have to face?
Well, they don't want to admit that because they don't want anyone to take the steps necessary to improve the integrity of the election process. You know, that's everything from requiring voter ID to requiring proof of citizenship when you register to vote. And unfortunately, there are groups in this country that they don't want that happening. They want it to be easy to commit fraud because that way, you know, particularly in close elections, they may be able to influence and steal the results.
Mark, to your side then, from the legal side of all this, because there are so many people, as I point out, say it doesn't exist. From a legal standpoint here, what needs to be done? What can we be done at least? Not necessarily to prove it's here, but to stop it from happening, to maybe take some preemptive actions to try and tamp down on voter fraud before it becomes an issue.
Well, obviously, many states have been doing that in the last few years in passing these voter ID laws, some of which have been upheld. Actually, I should say most of which have been upheld, but they're being challenged pretty energetically by people who don't like those laws. Now, I should point out that although there isn't a lot of evidence of voter fraud, there is some anecdotal evidence. I can tell you of one situation that happened in my hometown of Kansas City, in which in a primary where a fellow lost his primary election by one vote, and his aunt and uncle both voted twice for him. So it can have an effect on the results of elections. Not often, not very frequently. You know, thank goodness we're away from the old Chicago days of voting early and voting often. But it's something that the government, and it's up to the states mostly to decide these questions. It's something that, you know, falls within government's obligation to make sure that people who vote have properly registered, they are residents at the time they vote, and they're only voting once.
Hans, when we come down, no, please go ahead and finish, Mark.
No, I finished, Ed. Go ahead.
Okay, now, Hans, I was going to get to you this because there's another side of this where we talk about fraud. Voting by non-citizens, which you point out to, and that's something else that's a little bit frightening because according to surveys from the Cooperative Congressional Election Study, 6.4% of all non-citizens voted illegally in the 2008 presidential election. Now, that's 6.4%, 2.2% in the 2010 midterms. 1% would seem to be more than you want to slip past, correct?
Yeah, and in fact, that may have made the difference in why Al Franken won one of the closest Senate races in U.S. history in Minnesota. Remember, he was the 60th vote that gave us Obamacare. And in fact, if that 6.5% rate applied in North Carolina, remember, Barack Obama won North Carolina by only 14,000 votes in 2008. Those non-citizen voters would have been enough to give him the margin of victory. So this may be making the difference in victory and loss in close races all over the country. And that survey, that report by those professors said that.
Mark, about a minute and a half or so that we have left here as an attorney, how much do you fear this happening, in fear that this becomes a groundswell instead of just a trickle here and there? Because, again, getting the lawyers involved in this, the First Amendment portion of this, the different amendment portion of this, my goodness, we could open this up again for decades.
Well, I think Hans makes a good point about some elections that appear, and I'm not sure that it's been proved, but appear to have been affected by voter fraud. I think the simple fact that we're aware of it and that we're trying to pay attention to it is going to tamp down on the fraud. Again, we're not back in the old days when people's votes were literally bought and sold by, you know, $5. So I think simply because we are aware of the possibility that it could happen, that is going to result in fewer examples of it actually happening.
About 15 seconds, Hans. You think awareness will scare some people away?
Well, it might be some, but you've really got to put in measures to deter people from committing this, because elections means winning positions in government, and that means contracts, jobs, and power.
And there we go. It all comes down to power and money, one way or the other. Hans von Spakovsky, Mark Johnson. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. I'll look forward to the next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed.
All right, break and back here on MidPoint. Gloria Allred is here to detail the latest on the NFL's investigation of her client's claim of attempted rape by a current player. Later on this hour, checking the current polls as we head for the midterms. The big election coming up in 1 week. We've got it covered right here on MidPoint.